bit of a family affair. We've got Heather reading. We've got Jessica doing Sunday school downstairs. We've got Samuel here in the van. So it's all the same. We'll have my mother will be here soon doing her bits as well. Anyway, just to say, this is the second in a series that I'm doing on the nature of being. And last week, we talked about the idea that in essence, our sole purpose in life is to consciously live through our experience of being. That's really our purpose in life, to be really conscious of living. And what is asked of us is to donate our being to be used by God in the unfolding of creation. That we offer ourselves individually as living sacrifices made holy by giving ourselves over to that ground of all being, which is another word, or shall I say 4 words, ground of all being, for God. And that by giving ourselves over, we join with the love that's at the center of all things and express that love through ourselves in creation. And last week I handed out being donor cards that you can fill in to express your assent to the process. Remembering that Thomas Merton describes faith as intellectual assent. And filling in that card is a moment of intellectual assent to the process. A moment to say, yes, I'm giving my life up to the unfolding of creation. And if you missed that last week, there are some being donor cards still at the back of the church, just in the hall there. So in looking at being, we have that description of God as the ground of all being. It's a phrase that Paul Tillich, who's the Christian existential philosopher, came up with. And that phrase, the ground of all being, suggests the idea that the divine nature is in fact foundational to all being. And therefore, we're only truly at home as individuals when we root our being in the greater being that contains all. So there's that ground of all being, and we're really at home when we root our own being in that greater being that contains all. It's like the idea which says that we experience our lives as waves on the ocean. Our lives are like waves on the ocean. But the truth only comes to us when we realize that as waves, we are part of the greater ocean. And the ocean is expressing itself as the wave through us. We tend to think ourselves as being separate, or being Nicholas or Tracy or Carolyn, when in reality we are only really truly ourselves when we express ourselves as a part of the ground of all being that contains and connects all things. So how do we ground ourselves to be part of that greater whole that invites us to be a part of? What is it that allows ourselves to be expressed as something greater, as opposed to just making it up as we go along and hoping for the best? Well, I think the first step in grounding ourselves in that way is obviously to make that decision to be part of something greater. We have to make the decision. That was the idea of the being donor card. It's the giving of the intellectual assent to the idea that we do want to be a part of that. But in order to do that, we have to understand that we do have a choice. We have to go through all those ideas, is all this random? Is there a God? Is the God in the sky? Who am I in all that? I mean, all those questions, that religiously and spiritually have to ask, that whole process, which leads us to the understanding that there is an order in the universe, and that order is loving and that we can be a part of that if we so choose. That's the beginning point of this. And most of us here have been through that arc of thinking, is it all random? Is God in the sky? That sort of stuff. And we've come to the idea, I think most of us, that the universe is a unified whole of which we are a part, like the ocean and the wave, and that we can choose to work with that whole rather than just go for our own selfish desires. We can choose to do that. And that brings us to the being donor card, the decision to give ourselves up for that greater good. That's the moment of intellectual assent, the moment where we step out in faith. And that moment appears in all religions. Evangelical Christians, Bible-believing Christians will ask you whether or not you've given your life to the Lord. Have you given your life to the Lord? An evangelical Christian will ask you. And actually, that's the same question, really. I mean, you have to go through all the ramifications, but they're asking you that same questions. Are you grounded in the ground of all being? The Tao Te Ching says, the great way is easy, yet people prefer side paths. Be aware when things are out of balance. Stay centered in the Tao. That's the centering again in the great Tao, in the ground of all being. And that famous story that Heather read from the Upanishads, like two birds of golden plumage, inseparable companions, the individual self and the immortal self are perched on the branches of the selfsame tree. The former tastes of the sweet and bitter fruits of the tree, the latter tasting of neither calmly observe. The individual self, deluded by forgetfulness of his identity with the divine self, bewildered by his ego, grieves and is sad. But when he recognizes the worshipful Lord, the ground of all being, the true self, and beholds his glory, he grieves no more. Seeing him present in all, the wise man humbles himself, puts himself not forward. His delight is in the self, his joy is in the self. He serves the Lord in all. So you've got that similar situation in all those religions where there's that grounding in that basic, bigger self, ground of all being, whatever it is. That is the essence of the journey. The idea of living in and for the divine self. The idea of living in pure being. That's the first step, is the decision to do that. And the second step is to allow yourself to be shown the way. Zen Master Dogen, the 13th century Zen master, says, when you leave the way to the way, you attain the way. When you leave the way to the way, you attain the way. You make your decision, and then you give up to the way to show you. When you leave your way to the way. In other words, when you don't make decisions about what you've got to do, when you allow that ground of all being to show you what to do in your life, then you find the way. And for that to happen, you have to be sensitive to what you're being asked to do. What is that? What is the universe? What is that which is at the center of all things asking you to do in your life? There's no point in donating your being and then going off to party for the next week thinking that, I've done it now, that's all fine. You have to be sensitive. I love that phrase, life's longing for itself. Life's longing for itself is both the ground of all being longing for us to participate and for the longing within us to be a part of that ground of all being. Life's longing for itself. We have to be sensitive to life longings for itself. How is the longing that the ground of all being has for you manifested in your life? Whether we like it or not, we're all being called to be part of that ground of all being. That calling has brought us to the point of donating our being. And that same calling will take you to the next stage. And it really could be anything. An action, a practice, a book, a person, a lifestyle. At each moment, the calling is there if you listen for it. My calling has gradually taken me deeper into the practice of meditation, to the experience of pure being that comes out of that practice. But your calling might take you elsewhere. And if you're true to the idea of giving yourself over to being a part of that great oneness that contains all, then you'll listen as to how to do it. Because to be is really to express the isness of who each of us are within the greater whole. To be is really to express the isness that each of us are within the greater whole. The isness of who we are in a rock band or in the high school band will be actually different to the isness of who we are as part of the lacrosse team. Is also different from the isness of who we are as a part of our own family. Our isness, our beingness, is actually determined by that which we identify with. And the greatest isness, the greatest beingness, is to identify within ourselves as part of the ground of all being. So as we identify not as the wave, but as the ocean, so the way that we express ourselves will change. Even the isness of ourselves as being a Christian, or whatever religion, is not enough. It will affect our isness in a certain way, and you can see the problems that causes as religions fight among themselves, and people within religions fight among themselves. But it'll not have us identify with the ocean that includes all things, that bird that recognizes the worshipful Lord as his own true self and beholds his glory. It's that level of isness that we are aspiring to here. And that isness is not expressed by the mind, which always wants to be separate so it survives, but it's expressed by the heart, which is naturally connected to all and does not seek its own survival, but identifies with the whole. In the journey to see the way by which we're being led, we have to use our hearts as our compass, feeling our way through situations led by courage, the courage, the heartage that is within us, the heartage, the courage that's within us, which is why we use practice to develop the heart. It may not be the way of all, but it is a way that's often given. It may be that you develop your heart senses by walking in the mountains, or by being in nature, or letting go of the mind that way. Some people use art, painting, pottery, music making, film making, and they become engrossed, so engrossed that their hearts lead them rather than their minds. We get lost in music, which really means that our minds let go and our hearts take over. In each case, there's a very special quality of being that emerges, one that's not conceived by the mind, but comes through giving up to surrounding. We become one with the activity that we're participating in, and therefore we express the purity of being, unsullied by the mind. And the bigger the context, the greater the purity of being. A sportsman might express her purity of being through the pursuit of a gold medal. And, she may give up to the gold medal. She may be really in her being. She may roar down that track and be being at the purest level. But when she's got the gold medal or not, that's the end of it. The context is the arrival at the gold medal. An artist is painting, but once finished, so to some extent does the expression of being. Even the genius, even Einstein said, who said, I never came upon any of my discoveries through the process of rational thinking. He has science as the end point of his being. But to give yourself to the ground of all being for the sake of love and for the sake of love alone is the greatest context that we can aspire to. It's an ongoing, moment by moment commitment that includes all actions, all people, all circumstances. It is a way of life committed to being of service. As in that prayer from Thomas Merton that I used last week. A part of that says, I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope that I have the desire in all that I'm doing. I hope that I'll never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. You'll lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. That is, if you give up to the way will become the way. That is the idea that we just give up to that being. That's leaving the way to the way, and therefore attaining the way. We're led into that way from where we are now. But often, we don't like that. That old story of the farmer who was asked the way to the big city by a traveller. And the farmer replies, if I were going to the big city, I'd not want to be starting from here. And we often think of that in our lives. If we're going for true being, we wouldn't really be wanting to start with this sort of shambliness that we are in our own life. We often don't like where we're starting from. Our age, our disposition, our circumstances. They don't seem to lend themselves to the great path, which is why practice helps. A sailor once complained that his boat was going nowhere, and his companion said to him, it would help if you put up the sails. The sails catch the wind, and then we have progress. Spiritual practice catches the wind of that ground of all being and enables us to navigate our way on the path. It's done within the greatest possible context and contains the mechanics that right us and enables us to stay on the path. We're going to have a little bit of music now. I'm going to reset up the room a little bit while we're having the music, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about practice after that. So I've got my magic tricks out here, and I want to talk a little bit about that whole idea of how in meditation we express that ground of all being, and how we sort of go into it, that allow our minds to drop away, and that our hearts are then grounded in that ground of all being. And that what happens then is that because our minds aren't involved, that portal opens up that allows the aliveness sort of to come through us. And, I'm just going to give you a little bit about how I think of it. And you can either throw it away or not. And I'm going to talk about the breath. I know some of you work on mantras and all that sort of business, but I'm just going to talk a bit about the breath. And my problem is always in meditation is that I'm always thinking about something else. I'm doing my meditation. I'm thinking about Columbo and, some episode or Homeland or something, a recipe. Or I'm worrying about, housing or whatever it is in my mind. So over the years, I've really had to be clear and develop some techniques that really don't allow me to do that. And the first thing I do in meditation is I make a decision that I'm not going to miss a single breath. that if I'm following my breath, I make a firm decision that there is no breath that I'm going to miss, that I'm going to be staying with that breath all the way through the process. And I do it for half an hour. And I'm going to be staying with it all the way through. And I will find that my mind will come in. I do a sort of circular breath like this. I'll find my mind will come in, but I can then just measure the fact that I've still stayed with the breath. I immediately come back to it. And the way that I tend to do that is I tend to imagine a circular motion. And when I breathe in, I imagine myself breathing in all the way up, all the way down, then breathing out. And I just follow that circular motion all the way through and keep that following it. Now, I can see teachers amongst us, so I do apologize for the way that I'm going to be doing this. But I'm not very good at drawing, but I'm just going to give you a picture. Embarrassed son over there. I'm going to give you a picture. I'm going to give you a picture as to how I actually see it working in terms of meditation. Now, this is supposed to be, there's me, right? And here is the breath. This is the breath here. And notice that the breath goes, when you breathe in, you're in the inner world. This is the inner world here. And as you breathe out into the outer world. So actually you can see straight away that what breath is about is the inner and the outer. And this is our inner experience sort of thing. And as we breathe in the outer world, into our inner experience. And then we breathe out again. So what happens is that we are consciously in just following the breath. We follow it up. We follow it out. And by creating this circular movement, we're actually creating a centering on the inner world and the outer world. We bring the two together. It's brought together by the fact that we're concentrating both on the inner and on the outer world. And my perception of this is by doing this, it stills the mind and it opens up that portal of love that is within us. And actually we are able to truly be. And the idea of circular motion creating stillness it's an obvious thing when you think about it. I've got a gyroscope here. Now this gyroscope really, it won't stay upright or fall over. This is where I fail or not. But if I take the gyroscope and put it on here, it basically has its own gravity. And it will stay in that place because of the movement that is going on. It is held in that place. And you can see it's almost like the movement of the planets, the way that we're held around it. And the idea of the inner and the outer has the same sort of perspective. It creates a stillness within us. Before this falls over, I'll stop it. It creates a stillness within us that allows that being to come through because we're not focused or concentrating on anything else except that circular motion. The circular motion that's taking the inner and the outer. And by doing that, a sense of pure being comes about. And in that sense of pure being, it allows that love to come through. So, just to give you a sense of it. So, when I'm doing this, that I'm focusing on the breath coming in and then out. And because it's so slow, I can actually keep my mind on it. And I'm creating this circular motion that is a circular motion of pure being. That is the nature of meditation. It is creating that stillness at the center of all that links the inner world and the outer world and opens that portal. Now, I'm going to just give us an opportunity to just try this out in a moment. You'll be terrified to hear. But has anyone got any questions at all? You just put your hand up and I will repeat them just for those watching online. I'm afraid online you can't ask. If you were here, you would be able to ask questions, but you are in your pajamas at home with your cup of coffee, but do come and hear with all of us. Anybody? Yes, Heather, what's your question?
It's an observation that The red circle.
Yeah, I'm going to get you a microphone. Matt, if you could just turn the microphone on, this is longer than that. I'm going to hold the microphone for COVID reasons. Here we are.
Okay. It's just interesting to me to see where you've put the red circle. Is that how you visualise it? Because the way you were talking was like the red circle was coming down more into your body.
Yes.
And I just think it's an interesting, subtle difference.
Yes, I think the circle does come down into... I'm afraid my drawing is not very good. When I'm actually visualising, it does come right down into my body and out again like that. It comes right the way through my body. And so it contains my body and all that sort of business. Yes, it does. That's absolutely right. Thank you. Any other questions or any observations before we have a... No, Bruce, here we are.
As you practice this, sort of neuroplasticity, are you changing the sort of the strength or dimensions of your brain? I mean, do you find that, because you've been doing it for so long, you can do it longer and longer and more effortlessly without even really, it becomes unconsciously competent as far as, it's like, doing reps in the gym or something.
Yes. I think I'd want to say two things about that. I say, in terms of my practice, it's taken me a while to get to this, where I now know that I don't miss a single... I mean, obviously, if something happens, I get a knock on the door from downstairs, say, excuse me, the lavatory's blocked. Unfortunately, then I do have to let go and, things like that. I do find that, I have developed into this, but it's interesting, while I'm doing it, I'm not looking for any particular result. I'm looking to get out the way completely. So I'm not even looking for my life to be different or for my mind to be different. I'm just looking to totally get out the way and allow myself just to be a part of that ground of all being without any expectation of return. And so that is the essence of the loving nature of doing it. Does that make sense? I do find that I am become, proficient in not missing a single breath. And some days are better than others. Depends on, sometimes, it'll be like breathe, 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 worry, worry, breathe, 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 television, television, breathe, breathe. But, I don't miss a single breath, but sometimes some days are better than others. Anybody else? Okay, so should we have a quick go of this and see what to do? So I just wanted you to have just a bit of a practice at it. So if you just maybe close your eyes, and it's going to be more difficult because with me rabbiting on, your mind is going to be connected to that as well. But just to give you an idea. So when you breathe in, just imagine that circle coming up through your body to your head, and you're breathing out, and the circle is coming down in the outer world, and then breathing in and breathing out. And interestingly enough, I think the slower you do it and the deeper you do it, it's easier. And then you just let go sometimes, and you just find yourself breathing at a certain pace. First of all, there's that decision to not miss a breath. It's very important, I think, the decision. And then the following of the breath. Breathing in, breathing out. And then just carrying on in that circular way. Just following the circle in your mind's eye. Okay, we'll leave it there. And that is creating that stillness of the gyroscope. It is opening that portal. You don't know what it's doing. I'm going to talk next week a bit more about what that creates in life. But in opening your beingness, you don't know the result of it, but you're allowing that yourself to become a vehicle, a portal for love. And I think that will affect the way that you live your life and the way that things happen. It's discovering the path. Any other little questions or anything? Yes, let me just come over to you, Don, so that you don't have to. I think this is probably the easiest way to do it. Thank you, Don.
So in meditation, I usually use a mantra.
Yeah.
What is your thought on that? Like I'll use so hum, so in, hum out.
Yes, I'm not experienced at using a mantra, but I do know that that following the mantra is equivalent to following the breath in that it is the point of focus, and that you're keeping yourself on that point of focus throughout. If you say, what's the mantra for the Christian Meditation Society? Maranatha. Maranatha. That's the Christian meditation mantra. Maranatha. Now, I think it is still possible to visualize an inner and outer in using the mantra, but you're not necessarily following your breath. You could actually just use it with that. I'm not experienced with mantras myself, but I think that concept of the inner and the outer world, that concept of opening the portal, that concept of the mind being out of the way, it is pretty still essential. I mean, do you have any wisdom from yourself as to how you think it links the inner and the outer?
Not really. It just, it's a good rhythm for me.
Yes.
It's a good way for me to stay focused on the meditation.
I think that's an interesting word, rhythm. Rhythm is an interesting word because rhythm does actually allow that going onness to happen. And I do find sometimes I rock. Not I rock. I sometimes literally rock on my stool with that and allow that. And I think rhythm is an important thing. And you're really in the rhythm of the ground of all being. There's a vibration. You're in that rhythm. And just to remind you why we're talking about this, we're talking about the nature of being. And we're talking about how to express pure being. And it's only practice. But I think it's always worth saying that practice is as real as anything else. You can't differentiate between practice and eating a meal, or practice and anything else, because it's just another part of your life. It's just as real as anything else that's going on. And you're just focusing on that as an emphasis, like with osmosis, that in practicing on that ground, that beingness, it will come out in your life a bit more. So that's my teacher skills. I do apologise for all of that. And now we've got to, before we do that, I must remember to mention the offertory. We do have an offertory here. So if you'd like to come out and put your money in the plate, we'd really appreciate it. I'd just like to finally close the door on gift day. Say thank you so much for everybody that gave. Our goal was $35,000. We raised $34,000, which is pretty much there or thereabouts. And I think it's an amazing amount of money to raise. I'm so grateful for everybody. You'll be hearing from me. Everybody that made a contribution, thank you so much for doing that. It meant the world to me that you did that. And we're totally within the area that we were going for.